Hi, I'm Oliver Winman, he, him pronouns, and I am with CR Pride. And here with me is Storm O'Brink.
I use they, them pronouns. I work as a volunteer coordinator of the Rape Victim Advocacy Program. I am also a certified childbirth educator and full spectrum doula, and I've been doing LGBTQIA rights activism for more than 15 years.
That kind of leads us into why we're here today. We're talking about International Trans Visibility Day. It is a day that was started back in 2009. It's about raising awareness against discrimination and celebrating the existence of trans folks. It is also about the education and helping people get the information that they need to be able to educate themselves.
And in our community, it's otherwise known as the day on which we cannot commit crimes because we are visible. That's a joke, for the record.
The term trans is one to kind of state not cisgender.
Like cisgender means like you identify with the sex that you were assigned at birth. The majority of the population in the United States is cisgender.
And so you have the binary aspect of you can have your trans man, trans masculine, trans femme, trans woman, but you also have everything in between, like non-binary. And non-binary has a whole bunch of subsets as well, such as bigender, gender fluid, I think omnigender is one as well.
Yeah, there's like a lot of different names for all of it, and like keep in mind too that it's all culturally dependent because the way that we think of gender in our culture is different than it would be in other places in the world, and because of that we know that gender is a social construct. So the words that we have for all the different gender identities here in the US are not going to be the same in other parts of the world, and they're not going to conceptualize it the same way.
It's really cool to think about language and how that all comes together, because then trans can also be its own prefix as well, because there are, like, at least from my experience of being a trans man, there are also people who are not cisgender, but they are a man, and they don't want to be known as a trans man, they're just a man.
So like the trans umbrella, it encompasses non-binary folks under it, right? Because it basically means anyone who doesn't identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. But there are also non-binary folks who wouldn't self-identify as trans. I mean, I personally self-identify as trans, but like I do know other people who would not conceptualize it that way. So I think that's why you see the framing of trans and non-binary, even though non-binary people are by definition trans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I was trans for a while. Like, hindsight being what it is, there was so much foreshadowing ahead of time. But now I'm like, okay, I sort of knew, but I didn't know at all. I went with my gender dysphoria, which is, how would you describe gender dysphoria? I feel like we need to
It's
touch
like
on that real
the
quick.
feeling of like incongruence with your body and your mind. Sometimes it's like a feeling of discontent. Sometimes it manifests as depression.
Yeah.
Just like disagreement, like with the way that your body or gender that you've been assigned like suits you.
For me, with my dysphoria, I went hyper feminine because I knew that something was off, something didn't suit me and wasn't right, and I was like, maybe I'm just not girly enough, or I'm not fitting that feminine mold enough. And it did actually start becoming a bit of dysmorphia as well. I was like, well, what if I had the hourglass figure even more so? And I was corset training pretty intensely, and you can do that safely, but I didn't, because I was trying to get to that right away because I wanted to feel better in my body. And it wasn't until I did drag as a drag king for the first time that I saw my reflection and went, oh, yeah, that's what's off. Okay, now what do I want to do with this information? And it still took me several years before I actually came to terms with it myself.
My story is actually kind of complicated, and I don't think, okay, obviously, like, no trans person can speak for all trans people, but my experience is influenced by the fact that I'm intersex. And it took me a while to actually figure out that that was the word for what was going on with my body. So, typically when babies are born, they're assigned like a male or female gender, based on just like the presentation of their genitals. And so if we think about biological sex, it's made up of a variety of different characteristics. It's not just genitals, but it's also chromosomes, secondary sex characteristics, your hormonal patterns. Some people don't figure out that they're intersex until later in life. Some people know right away because they're born with ambiguous genitals. But I was one of the folks that I was impacted in the secondary sex characteristics category. I didn't figure it out until I hit puberty, actually. So intersex people are people who are born in between or have biological sex characteristics that aren't easily characterized as male or female. And they make up like about 1.7% of the population, which makes them statistically as common as twins. So it's like, I knew something was different about my gender in high school. I was kind of a little bit later, like you. And there is nothing wrong with being later, because there's all these narratives out there that they'll say, oh, people know from the time that they're 3. And I think that's absolutely fabulous for those people. And that's not my story.
Yep,
and that's okay.
same.
And both are valid.
My mom knew. My mom knew before I did. Like, she actually has legal documents that specifically state that the genders mentioned of her children are apt to change and are only being used as placeholders at the time of this document. And I'm like, my mom knew.
Oh, wow.
When I went to come out to my mom, I was like getting ready to be like, okay, got this. And I was like, Mom, I don't know if you noticed, but I've been wearing men's clothing a lot more. And before I could go any further, she was like, I have 2 sons, I know. And I'm like, huh, wind right out of my sails. But it was nice to have that appreciation and acknowledgement as well. Like, I think my mom got an inkling because I was that kid that absolutely wanted to wear dresses and tights, but I wanted to do everything that the boys were doing. I had no interest in like baby dolls. Like, regular dolls, fine. If they look, like adult-ish, you're like, okay, I can have these really complex narratives. But I wanted to climb trees. I wanted to be in the mud and all of that stuff. But I was still like, I want the tights, please, thank you.
You were always a boy, you just wanted to be shiny.
Yes, I've always been fabulous, okay? Yeah. But I didn't know.
Yeah, sometimes you just don't know until later. Well, and with me, like, okay, so I started growing facial hair when I was about like 14 or 15 or so, which isn't really expected for the puberty that I was told I was gonna have. And then also like growing hair in all the areas that you would typically see men growing hair. It turns out that it's evidence of having higher testosterone levels in my body just naturally. So I think most non-binary people are not intersex. And so like their experiences are a little bit different than mine. Like, I think my experience being like an intersex and non-binary person, it's kind of like about coming back into myself and identifying like with myself and accepting like this body that I have that is definitely in between. And, a lot of folks say that these bodies don't exist, especially in the political sphere, but hey, I'm here. You can say it to my hairy face. I do exist. And so that was like a part of me kind of rethinking the way that I thought about gender. So I tried to come out actually when I was 16. Like I was a Gay Straight Alliance president at Waterloo West High back in like the mid 2000s. Mm-hmm. Through there, like I was starting to get the words to describe my experience by talking to other people, across the US and across Iowa. And I was like, oh, I think genderqueer is like the thing that I am. And I actually like started coming out to some of my friends about it, but I ended up going back into the closet, and I don't think this is one of my mother's proudest moments, and she could possibly be upset with me talking about it, but there was like a time in the Wendy's drive-thru where she was taking me through, and we were almost up to go place our order, and I think it's because she heard me talking to my friend Carl on the phone through the wall in the house and telling him about this, and she just says like out of nowhere, you know, if you ever thought that you were trans, I would institutionalize you. You are not that way. You were always a girl. And it's just like, oh my, where did this come from? Oh my God. And
that's such a different experience than for me, right? Like my mom's like, oh yeah, I already knew. And your mom's just like, no, just no.
Okay, and like this is gonna sound crazy though. Like my mom's a Democrat. Like my mom, like she believes in like the rights of trans people to do stuff and like transition and all that.
Exist.
Like she had like trans people coming in and out of her house all the time because of me and all the friends that I had. So it was just like really strange when she was saying that stuff. Like I would have you institutionalized. I'd send you to therapy. You are not that way. And so I was like, okay, message received. I'm just gonna keep that to myself from now on. And then I decided not to come out again until I was like, just as I was like moving out of her house, actually. So like some of my friends knew in the last year of me living there.
So kind of talking about difficult or challenging things that we've encountered in just our transition and our journey and things like that. I really appreciate you being here today because it is so important to hear about other people's processes. I was very lucky. I was very lucky that the challenges that I've been on the legal side of things, because on the social side of things, even from being, from small town Iowa, I've had a lot of support. I've had a supportive family, even my father, who I haven't talked to in years, when I got a voicemail from him, and I never actually formally came out to him, used my actual name, actually said Oliver. And that is just blows my mind. Like he heard about it from my sister, but like still it wasn't a thing that he imposed on me, the name he picked out. What are things that you would like to share on that, and how it has been your process and journey?
About the difficult experiences and the in-betweens and all that. So the thing is, I actually have a really strong support system with my friends. Like I was always surrounded by other people who were accepting of trans folks and would gender me correctly and call me by the proper name and the proper pronouns. When I started in victim services, I think that was a really good field choice for me. I think trans acceptance does depend on your field of choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was expecting more pushback as a massage therapist because that is a female-dominated career, and my clients, some of them were seeing me specifically because they wanted a female massage therapist that they felt more comfortable with. But I was very surprised that they're like, no, I'm still comfortable with you. Like, you are who you are. So, but there are so many other fields that people don't feel safe coming out in.
Yeah, so many. Like, and I mean, I even think about like some people that are really dear to me are searching for jobs right now, and I'm actually kind of terrified for them because someone really dear to me is searching for a job as a teacher this semester and is in her last semester of getting her master's degree. And with some of the bills going through in Iowa right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen next. But with my field, victim services, it's particularly progressive because about half of all trans people are sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. And so, you have to have a group of people working with survivors who's trans inclusive because we have to be able to provide quality, culturally relevant services to trans people. And so I was lucky with my field. because they already had some of the education down. I mean, I had to, push some of my colleagues to get their head in the game a little bit more.
You had to be part of that education.
I did. Yes, I did. I had to be part of that education, and that's okay. Everybody's at a different point in their journey. As much as it like personally irritates me at times, like I also understand that like not everybody knows everything, and everybody, is at a point where they have less knowledge at some point.
Actually, that kind of another thing that's important about like an International Trans Visibility Day is it helps people get the terms that they need so that they can research it themselves and not always be relying on, hey, I know you, you're trans, do you know absolutely everything there is to know about this subject?
The tokenization.
Yeah, right. So having that visibility and that language so that people are able to educate themselves as well, like that makes sense, and then you've been part of that education and at least giving people the terms to be able to look for.
Yeah, so like my job and my friends were the things that, like I had, some issues at my job with colleagues misgendering me and whatnot, but that's, what it is. That was easy to cope with because I'm like, at least I can like educate them and they'll be on my side.
They'll be receptive to it.
Family was a little bit harder.
Yeah.
It still continues to be hard. And it's not actually that my family is particularly anti-trans. It's that like, I think they just like don't get it as it applies to me. Like, unfortunately, my mom, when I came out the second time around and I stopped shaving my face actually when I moved to Iowa City to go work at RVP. And she did not handle that really well. I think I'd visited her house a couple times and she didn't notice until it got like, I think just like a certain level of long enough, and we were out like at a restaurant that we normally go to, and she's just like, am I allowed to swear in this thing, by the way?
You can swear.
What the fuck is on your face? And so then I was like, hair, Mom. It's my hair that grows out of my face that I can do because my body can do that. And she just like got really into it with me. She said, you're hideous. I'm embarrassed to be seen in public with you. And I think she'd probably be kind of ashamed of some of those things that she said now, because I think she's grown at least a little past that. Granted, she still won't use they, them pronouns on me. And I don't think she can conceptualize me as being somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. But, we're not back in that period 5 years ago where she basically didn't talk to me for 2 weeks after that. And I want to like be clear that I wasn't even like a bad kid, like I had I had all A's growing up. Like I went to college like I was expected to, and, got out on my own like I was expected to, and was supporting myself and like doing all like the typical good kid things. Like I never even got grounded, and I didn't do drugs, and I didn't even get drunk until I was 23. Okay, like I was a good kid. Like you really have nothing to complain about with me. So I'm just like, why have you forsaken me in this way? Why do you feel like this?
Yeah.
This is stupid. Like you just have a hairy kid. That's it. There's no problem. Yeah, so my mom, she didn't handle it well initially, which was weird, knowing all the trans people that she knows in her life and that she was cool with. But I think she kind of got over it since then, and that's been kind of like the biggest hurdle, I think, is like kind of trying to rebuild the relationship that I had with my mom.
Yeah.
Because we were particularly close, and she was a single mom and I was her only kid.
Yeah.
So I would say that was probably like, that was the biggest hurdle.
I know my mom had a really hard time with coming to terms with not having a daughter, because prior to me coming out, she had a son and a daughter, and she was able to share a lot of things with me because I fit that particular gender norm. And those experiences aren't really the same anymore on that. So like, we don't go shopping in the same section of the clothing store or things like that. And that was a hard time for her coping, but thankfully
for me, she kind of used her own support structure for that instead of taking it out on me, which sometimes parents don't realize that they're doing that they're going, you took this away from me. Whereas it's not really the case, but it can feel that way. But it is working through that change and that loss that I feel like it's difficult. It's mildly understandable, but the way that you handle it is what's important. Like for parents watching this, if your child comes out as trans, use your support network to work through those feelings. That isn't your kid that's already working through their own really confusing and really hard process. Because it is a big change and big thing of growth for everybody involved, and growing has growing pains. So it's how do you minimize those growing pains and have the healthiest relationship after the fact that I think is really important. So I'm really thankful that that's something that my mom utilized instead of putting that as an emotional and mental load on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a healthy thing to do, like not to put it on your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because like there's always like the thing where like parents will be like, it feels like somebody died, and like all we can think is, no, like this is the first time that your child has felt alive.
Yeah.
In a long time. Open your eyes, like you're really missing the good stuff.
And the coming out part isn't a sharing bad news. It is this thing to be celebrated as this person trusts you enough with this very intimate and personal knowledge, and they feel safe with you to do so. And so with lashing out from that, it is understandable to be mourning a future that you know will no longer be. Like, my mom knows that wedding dress shopping is not going to happen. When I got my hysterectomy, she also mourned the possible future of me having kids and being able to share that life experience of pregnancy. And it is just as understandable to mourn those possible futures as it is for when I got diagnosed with EDS, which is a physical disability. I still, when a new thing happens that I'm like, oh, I can't do this anymore, have those moments where I mourn those futures that I thought I could have. And so I understand that it is a hard process for parents and family members and all of the people that are in a trans person's life. But that also, it is not the responsibility of the trans person who came out to be the support system for that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, like because they're going through their own thing, like the healthiest thing is to be able to like seek support elsewhere to try and deal with that grief, because like fielding your parents' grief over that, I think adds an extra layer.
It adds an extra layer of internalized guilt.
Yeah.
It's this thing of, oh, I made this person I care about sad, or I made them ashamed of me. I should be ashamed of myself. Maybe I shouldn't share this information with other people because all it does is create sad or bad feelings. When that isn't, like, at the moment, yes, that could be the truth. But it is really something that should be celebrated, because the act that's happening is a sharing of truths.
Yeah.
We know that there's those tough moments. We hear about that on the news a lot too, but like, why go through all of that? Why have those really hard moments? Why is it worth it? You know?
Yeah, it's like feeling at home. Because I think like the dominant cultural narrative is that people would only transition if things were really bad, and it's about like feeling so miserable, and I just don't agree with that at all. Like, I mean, I think that for some people, like, yeah, it is about like fleeing misery, but for me, I don't really see it as like fleeing misery. I see it as, charging towards joy.
I know for me, like, being able to see pictures of me and see my reflection and be like, that's me, is really awesome. Because before I would see pictures of me being hyper feminine and I'm just like, yeah, that's just somebody else. That's just a human being. And I didn't feel a connection to that. I didn't even feel a connection to my old name. And how I knew that I picked the right name for me was when somebody said Oliver in like disappointment, and I actually felt bad. Because before you could have said my old name and I'm like, whatever.
For me, I think it was like I wanted to have relationships with like friends and lovers and family where I was actually myself, where it was authentic, where they actually knew me as a whole person. And that was exactly what I got in return. I got the level of like emotional intimacy that I wanted with the people in my life, and have them have an understanding of me as a whole person rather than just the parts of me. And then being able to move as a whole person in all aspects of my life without the censorship, I think that's been really transformative for me. And I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like more secure, I think. And also, like, I don't think that I really started, like, fully accepting the body that I was born in, like, the intersex body that I was born in, until probably about this year. Because I had, like, all these fears that, as a non-binary person, even though I was intersex, like, I wasn't trans enough, because there's this, what they term a medicalist perspective. So the idea that you have to go on hormone replacement therapy or use surgeries to transition to be authentically trans, I don't agree with that. And, that narrative gets pushed on you by other people in the trans community a lot. And so,
which is hard when it's coming from the people who are feel like they're defining it. Because if it's from outside of the trans community, you could be like, well, you're not part of the community, you don't know. But when somebody inside the community is being like, no, if you don't do this, the gatekeepers, if the people who are gatekeeping the community are doing that, then it's like, well, maybe I don't belong here.
I think it comes from insecurity in the gatekeepers, like, and also just, when you have like a marginalized group that has lack of access to resources, like there are competitive mindsets that start to enter the scene rather than collaborative mindsets. And that's what I like to embrace more, is that collaboration. Yeah. So like with the trans medicalist stuff, like that kind of just, ate away at my brain. I want to say probably up until about this year, where I decided to finally get comfy in my identity. I'm 30. I might as well do it now, since I turned 30 back in August of 2022. I don't think I've ever really felt as good as I do right now.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Like, it is something to be able to have that feeling of being authentic. Because you talked about like, oh, people are going to transition, so it was really, really bad. Like, I've heard the kind of harmful speech of like, oh, well, trans men only transition if they're like an ugly girl or something like that. I was published in a lot of magazines as a model. That wasn't the case.
Word.
It was... I felt like I was putting a costume on every day.
Yeah.
And I love costuming. Costuming's great. But I felt like I could never take off the costume. And then when I realized that in doing drag, there was a costume I could put on that I didn't feel like I was in a costume with, this is great, except for now I have to go through the steps of putting on a costume. And now where I'm at, I will be celebrating my 5-year trans anniversary in July. And I have stubble after shaving like less than a week ago.
Look at you go.
I know, I am so proud of
You've
myself.
wanted this for yourself for a long time now.
I don't have to get out the cream makeup and stipple and like use setting powder or anything like that. No, it happens. And I am sure that 5 years from now I will be going, I literally shaved less than a week ago. Why do I have this? But it makes me very, very, very happy now because I can be authentic. I am not operating through that mask. So, what are some of your hopes and goals in advocating through your efforts and through your visibility?
I think that there are people who have anti-trans ideas, possibly because they haven't really met a lot of trans people. My hope is that through engaging in advocacy efforts, I can humanize us and encourage others to approach our community with a polite curiosity.
Yeah.
And perhaps like see us as the humans that we are.
Yeah.
And then maybe educate themselves about like what the needs are of our community.
That's where I'm at as far as like, I want people to come from it from an actual place of love.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
I want it to not be us against them. I would absolutely love that with the education and visibility, that it is about building a supporting community.
Yeah.